Hey friends, what's up? And welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Chavdalet, Daf 24 of Masechta Beitzah. Friends, we're starting the third perek of Masechta Beitzah. Fun stuff. The perek of Ein tzudin dugim in abivrim b'yomtiv. Fun perek, right? Well, I guess it's kind of reminds us of stuff that we've learned in Shabbos, a shtickle about tzud, trapping animals on Shabbos. And I mean Yom Tif in this case. So that's what we're going to kind of talk about. Whatever, it's cool. And so we see two Mishnahs today. The first Mishnah in Ein tzudin dugim min abivrim b'Yom Tif, and then another Mishnah that discusses also trapping animals. So if you're interested in those sugyas, so today's your daf. Friends, let's get started. We're on Daf Chav Gimel with Beis at the new perek at the bottom of the page. In tzudin dugim and abivrim b'Yom Tif, gewaldig. So we can't trap fish from like fish ponds on Yom Tif. Now that is super interesting. There's a great Rashi over here if anybody wants to look at it. The first Rashi of the perek. It's gewaldig. He basically explains that you're not allowed to trap fish in a fish pond on Yom Tif. How come? Well, because you could do it before Yom Tif, which is gewaldig. Why is it gewaldig? Well, because I think it answers some questions, at least in my mind it does, that, we talked about you're allowed to cook on Yom Tif, you're allowed to even carry in Rosh Hashanah on Yom Tif because you're allowed to carry food, now you can carry whatever you want. So then why can't I trap? Right? If we say that anything that's l'tzorech ochel nefesh is, I could do on Yom Tif, so then why can't I trap a fish? I could slaughter an animal. Why can't I trap a fish? Well, because you could have trapped it before Yom Tif. Whereas slaughtering an animal, you can't really slaughter it the day before. It's not the same. So you've got to slaughter it on that day. And therefore, I think in my mind, unless somebody could point out a flaw in the logic, the point is, and I think that if I understand Rashi correctly, the point is, things on Yom Tif related to food preparation that you can't really do the day before. You can't slaughter the animal the day before. You can't cook it the day before. I mean, maybe technically you can cook it, but I guess they didn't have refrigeration. You cook it for the Yom Tov Suda on that day. You're not going to cook it the day before. So you could slaughter the animal. You can cook the animal. You can carry it to your friend's house. Whatever it is. Trapping the animal though, you have to do beforehand. Right? Or, when it comes to baking, whatever, you can't harvest wheat on Yom Tif. That you should do before Yom Tif. But baking the bread, that you could do on Yom Tif. So the things that you kind of have to do that day. I guess technically you could bake the bread the day before, but I guess if you want bread on Yom Tif, so you'll bake the bread on Yom Tif. But the harvesting and stuff like that would already be done. Although I guess you can ask questions like, where do you draw the line? Like, I could technically bake the bread yesterday. So why am I allowed to bake the bread on Yom Tif? Well, if I want bread, then I have to bake it. Well, okay, but then if I want bread, then I maybe also have to harvest the wheat. Maybe that's a lot more involved. You're not going to do that the same day. Whatever it is. I don't know. I guess it would be interesting to drill down into the details about, how exactly we define what's considered what you have to do today and what you have to do yesterday. But, anyways, very, very interesting thing to think about, kind of the things that are allowed on Yom Tov are the things that you need to do today that you couldn't have done yesterday. I guess if you want to have fresh bread, well, fresh bread needs to be baked on Yom Tov, but it doesn't matter when it's harvested, so that you could do before Yom Tov already. Maybe you could say it like that. Anyways, super interesting. So therefore, in tzudin dugim and abivrim b'Yom Tov, so you're not allowed to trap. Yeah, maybe that's a workable sort of definition, that you're not allowed to trap fish on Yom Tov because technically you could have just trapped it the day before. There's no difference if you trap it the day before or today. Maybe that's a good working definition, right? Kilu, baked bread, fresh bread, or freshly barbecued meat or whatever is very different than a day old bread or a day old meat, right? So therefore that you're allowed to do on Yom Tov. But there's no difference if you trap the fish before Yom Tov or on Yom Tov, therefore you got to do it before Yom Tov. And you also can't feed the fish, as Rashi says, because they could basically feed themselves. Right? Either they eat from the bottom of the pond or whatever, or maybe they eat other fish. The big ones eat the little ones, says Rashi. So therefore you're not allowed to feed them. So you're not allowed to trap them, you're not allowed to feed them. Avo. But you can trap, chayas, undomesticated animals, and birds from their enclosures. we're going to have to explain sort of some details here. And we're allowed to feed them as well because, they rely upon sort of us to feed them. And Rashi says because in the winter they need kind of food because I guess there's not as much stuff to rummage around on, and even in the summer if it's a place where like people are walking around there isn't like grass and stuff, so okay, you could feed these animals because they kind of need you more. All right. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, says the holy Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, lo kol bivrin shavin. Not all bivrin are the same. Not all enclosures are the same. This is the rule. So if you still need to trap it, let's say it's a big biver, like let's say it's a big enclosure, and even in the enclosure you're still going to have to trap it, it's not really considered trapped already, well then also it's not going to be allowed. But if it's already in a place where I guess it's small enough and contained enough that it's already essentially trapped, well then you can chaparaim on Yom Tov. But 1 second. But we have a contradiction. What's the contradiction? Bivin shel chayev v'shel ofis. The enclosures of undomesticated animal and of a bird, ein tzudin man b'Yom Tov. You're not taka allowed to trap from them on Yom Tov. Ve'ein nosim l'fnei mizonis. Oh, friends, does that blow your mind? It did, right? Of course it did. That this Bryce is saying the exact opposite. Punkt fakert. Saying the exact opposite. It's saying that the enclosures of undomesticated animals and birds ain't tzudin man b'Yom Tov. You're not allowed to trap from them on Yom Tov. And you're not allowed to give them food. Our Mishnah said the exact opposite, that you are allowed to trap them and you are allowed to feed them. Kasha chaya chaya, kasha ofis ofis. So we have a contradiction both with regard to undomesticated animals as well as fegelas, birds. Bishlama chaya chaya lo kasha. So the Gemara says 1 second. So I can explain actually the undomesticated animals business. How? Haribura Rabban. Well, you could say it's machlokas Reb Yehuda and Rabbanan. Let's see. Titnan, we have a Mishnah in Shabbos that says Reb Yehuda Omer, says Reb Yehuda, Hatzod sipur lemigdal, a fellow who traps on Shabbos a bird into a closet. That seems pretty trapped to me. V'tzvila boyis, or a deer into a house. Okay, and he locks the door. That deer ain't going nowhere. Chayev, so he's going to be chayev. Okay, fine. Because that would be considered trapping. So that's Reb Yehuda's opinion. That if you sort of manage to sort of get a bird into a closet and a deer into a house. Now, a bird into a house is enough because it could fly out the window. I guess the assumption is that a deer won't jump out the window. So if you can get a deer into the house, that's considered trapping it, and you'll be chayiv for the malacha of tzod on Shabbos. Now, levayis would mechayiv halabivin lo. Now, the diuk is that, well, if you trap the deer into the house, it's considered trapped. But if you would trap it into some kind of just like enclosure, well, then it wouldn't be considered trapped. And if it's not yet considered trapped, kind of like what Reb Shimon ben Gamliel was saying, that if it's mechusar tzeda, if it still needs to be trapped, right? So then it's it's also right. So then you're going to be chayiv. So according to Reb Yehuda, bivrin would not be considered trapped. Into a house would be considered trapped. Into some kind of enclosure would not be considered trapped. And if it would not be considered trapped, so then you wouldn't be allowed to trap it on Yom Tov. It would have to already be trapped from before Yom Tov. So that would be the price. It would be Rabbi Yehuda v'Chacham Omer. Whereas the Chacham would say tzipor lemigdal, that yes, while a bird needs to be trapped in a closet, so he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda. However, utzvi legina v'lachotzer v'lebivrin. But a deer, which is an undomesticated animal, you would have to get that once already it is in a garden or in a was that the front door again? Yeah, the parents are still in town, so good. So that's number one. Although I'm not sure that was the front door. May have just been like a regular kind of drawer. All sorts of things. Okay, legina, so into a garden, v'lachotzer, or into a courtyard, v'lebivrin, and into these enclosures. So according to Chachamim, once it's in a beaver, once it's in an enclosure, it's already considered trapped. If it's already considered trapped, so it could chaparayin on Yom Tov. So therefore, our Mishnah that says that you'd be allowed to chaparayin from a animal, from a chaya, from a very bivrin of chayas on Yom Tov, so that's the Chacham. The Bryce that says not allowed, that is going to be Rabbi Yehuda, who says that a chaya needs to be trapped in a house, but not a beaver, it's not yet considered trapped. Givaldik. So we explained, the Mishnah is a Chacham, and the Beitzah is Rabbi Yehuda. Fine. Elo ofis kasha. But how do you explain the ofis? How do you explain the ofis business? Because our Mishnah said that you are allowed to chop a rind from birds from the bivrin, and yet the both Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim seem to agree that a bird would, as well as the Beitzah, would seem to agree that a bird from a beaver would not work. You would have to get it into a closet. Kasha. No, so the office kasha. And if you're going to try to say honami lo kasha, maybe you're going to say, no, come on, there's nothing to worry about. Well, our Mishnah that says that you're allowed to chop a rind, that's because the enclosure has a roof. And the Beitzah that says that you're not allowed to chop a rind is because that's talking about an enclosure without a roof, and it's not considered trapped. But that's not a good answer, because after all, both Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanon agree that a bird would have to be forced into a closet in order to be considered trapped, but a house would not be considered trapped because it could fly out the window. So therefore, if we're assuming that a house which has a roof over it is not going to be considered trapped when it comes to a bird, so then even a beaver with this enclosure with a roof on it also wouldn't be considered trapped. So again, what's the deal? How do we understand our Mishnah that seems to be saying that you'd be allowed to chaparine a bird from bivrin if really they're only going to be considered trapped if they're in a closet? Omer Rabba Bar Rav Huna, so says the holy Rabba Bar Rav Huna, here we're talking about a tzipor drawer. When we say that you mamish have to get it into a closet and that it's not considered trapped, that's talking about this tzipor drawer, askinon she'eino mekabelos marus, this rebellious bird that doesn't accept authority, and it kind of will fly around and it's not considered trapped. The Tana, as we learned in a Beitzah, the Tana of Rabbi Shmuel was taught in the Besmedrash Rabbi Shmuel Lamanikra Shema tzipor drawer. Why is it called a tzipor drawer? Shedare bebayis kebasodeh, that it lives in the house just like in the field. It feels right at home, and therefore it's not going to be considered trapped until you mamish corner it, until you mamish get it into a closet. Only at that point would it be considered trapped. But our Mishnah is talking about a regular fagel. It's talking about a regular bird that regular birds, I guess, once you get it into the bivrin, it's already considered trapped, and you can chaparine, so to speak. Oh, so now that we're taking this route, that when it comes, that we're basically able to explain the Mishnah versus the Beitzah, the Mishnah that says that you could chaparine from the bivrin, and the Beitzah that says that you can't. So we managed to explain it without a machlokas, without having to say it's a machlokas of Yehuda and the Rabbanon. We just basically said, oh, this is talking about this kind of bird, that's talking about that kind of bird, kind of just simple chilik. Well, if that's the case, chaya nami lo kasha. Well, let's take the same approach when it comes to the chayas, the undomesticated animals, and instead of saying it's a machlokas tanoim, rather just say it's a ukimta, it's a chilik. Habibiver cut, habibiver gadol. Depends how big the enclosure is. Kilu, our Mishnah that says that you're allowed to chaparine from the enclosures, that's talking about a small one. And the Beitzah that says that you're not allowed to chaparine from the enclosures is talking about a big enclosure. That's why you're not allowed to chaparine. Okay, givaldik. So you don't have to say it's machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda. They could both be the Chachamim. And the Chachamim just say, right, just like the Chachamim said in the Mishnah, that once you get the chaya, the deer into the bivrin, it's already considered trapped, and you're going to be chayav on Shabbos. So therefore also, they're going to say that in our Mishnah it's already considered trapped. And what about the Beitzah? Oh, the Beitzah is also Chacham. They're going to say that's talking about a big enclosure, and that's why it's not yet considered trapped, and you're not allowed to chaparine on Yom Tov. Hechidami biver kain, hechidami biver gadol. What's considered a small enclosure? What's considered a large enclosure? Amar Ravashi, says Ravashi, kolechet derayit abasu matula b'chad shachya biver kain. If you can walk into the enclosure and in one lunge you can get what you came there to get, i.e., you want to chop the deer, it's small enough that in one lunge you've got that deer. That deer ain't going nowhere. You got it in one lunge. Well, that's going to be considered a small enclosure. V'idach biver gadol. But if you wouldn't be able to get it in one lunge, maybe two lunges or more, so then if you can't, so how about this? Lunge for lunch. If you can't get it in one lunge, then you can't get it for lunch. Probably come up with something better. Lunge for lunch. Lunge. I don't know. Alright, we'll come up with something. Anyways, so, where were we? Right, so if you can get it in one lunge, you can eat it for lunch. If you can't get it in one lunge, maybe two or more, so then it's considered biver gadol, and you can't chap arayin. Inami or else kolecha deika ukze biver gadol. If it's got lots of little different corners, so then it's going to be considered a big beaver. Vidach biver kain. If it doesn't have lots of little corners, it's going to be considered a small beaver. Inami or else kolecha denafle tula dekasle adade biver kain. Or wherever the shade from the walls kind of fall on each other, so that's going to be considered a small beaver, right? If the shade from one wall hits the other one, it's a small one, vidach biver gadol. But if they don't hit each other, so then the maisa, it's considered a big one. So, friends, exciting stuff over here at Babylon Talmud B'Kitzer. Reb Shimon Gamliel, says Reb Shimon Gamliel, lo kol abivin shavin v'chulei. So says Reb Shimon Gamliel that not all enclosures are created equal. Let's see. Amr of Yosef, Amr of Yehuda, Amr Shmuel. This is Gevaldik. Says of Yosef, the name of Yehuda and the name of Shmuel. Halacha Reb Shimon Gamliel, that the halacha is like Reb Shimon Gamliel, that if it's enclosure that you would still, it's large enough that you still need to trap it even in there, it's asur. But if it's already considered trapped, it's mutter. So it says Rav Yosef that essentially the halacha is like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. Amalei Abaye, now Abaye says to Reb Shimon, to Rav Yosef, halacha mechlal de plige. Well, if Rav Yosef, you're saying that the halacha is like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, that implies that there's somebody who argues on Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, and we need to then say the halacha is not like the other fellow, rather it's like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. But that doesn't seem to be the case. Is there anybody who actually argues on Reb Shimon ben Gamliel? Amalei umay nafkaloch mino, and Rav Yosef says, who cares? Fine. So if somebody argues on him, so the halacha is like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. If nobody argues on him, so the halacha is also like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. What's the big deal, friends? This is something we've seen a few times. Omar le, Abaye responds to Rav Yosef, Gemara, Zemor teteh. What, do you just want learning to become like singing a song? Like it's like not important. Like, oh yeah, who cares? The halacha, maybe it's important, maybe it's not, whatever, who cares? So the halacha is like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. Maybe somebody argues, maybe it doesn't. What's the difference? What do you mean, what's the difference? The difference is that we take this seriously. This isn't just a song that we sing, to just kind of, I don't know, that we don't take seriously. We do take it seriously. And therefore, if we're going to say that the halacha is like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, then it has to imply that there's a machlokas. But says Abaye, that doesn't necessarily seem to be the case. Okay, very interesting. Oh, so Reb Shimon ben Gamliel had said that this is the rule, that if it still needs to be trapped, so then memele, it's going to be asur because you still have to trap it. You have to trap it before Yom Tov, not on Yom Tov. But if it doesn't still need to be trapped, if it's already considered trapped, so then you can chap arayin. So we had seen before Rav Ashi's opinion that it's dependent on the lunges. If you do it in one lunge, it's already considered trapped. If it's going to take more than that, it's not considered trapped. So now, so what's going to be considered lacking trapping. So we're going to see another opinion over here. Rav Yosef, Rav Yehuda, Rav Shmuel. If you have to say, look, bring us a trap so that we could trap it, well then clearly it's not yet trapped. Abaye says to Rav Yosef, but one second, when it comes to geese, when it comes to chickens, so we still have to say, look, let's get a trap and let's trap the chicken or the goose. Vitanya, and yet we learn in the Beitzah that a fellow who traps geese or chickens or these yonei hardeisos potter, so he's potter. He's potter. I.e., you're allowed to trap them. But one second, these are animals that you say, hey, bring over a trap so we could trap it, and yet we're saying it's allowed. So Rav Yosef, how does that work? So Rabbi Bar Avuna Amar Shmuel, halau bon lichluvan la'erev, v'alalu ein bon lichluvan la'erev. So it depends. When it comes to geese and when it comes to chickens, they come to their coop. They come to their coop at night. Because they come to their coop at night, they're kind of easy to trap over there. And even if they're outside of the coop, we consider it to be okay. But undomesticated animals or birds that you would have to say, hey, we need to trap this animal because it's, otherwise there's no way to get it. Well, then that would be considered, lacking being trapped. But what about birds of the dovecote, or doves from the dovecote, or doves of the attic? Okay, that they come to their coop at night. Vitanya, and yet we have a Beitzah that says that somebody who traps doves of a dovecote or doves of a attic, or birds that nested in jars in mansions. Sounds nice. Chayiv. You can be chayiv. So here we have examples of these birds that go to their coop at night, and yet you're not allowed to trap them. Well, when it comes to the goose and when it comes to the chicken, yeah, they come to their coop at night, and so it makes it easy to trap them, and you have to feed them. They're your geese, they're your chickens. However, when it comes to the doves and these other birds that go to these mansions and stuff, well, they're like kind of wild birds. So you don't have a responsibility to feed them. Rav Mari Omar Hani Avidi Rabuye Vanilo Avidi Rabuye. Rav Mari says that these birds of the mansions, these doves and stuff, well, they are hard to catch. They like jump around. Vanilo Avidi Rabuye, but chickens and geese don't. What do you mean? Kuluname Avidi Rabuye. A chicken and a goose, mistam, is also going to run around if you try to kill it. So it's also going to run around until you manage to do what you want. So the chluvan ka'amrinan da'avida l'rabuye. So we're saying, yeah, but the difference is that these other birds, even when they come to their like coop, they also like run away and stuff. They're just like very elusive, these other birds. But I guess chickens and stuff and geese are not as elusive, I guess. All right, sounds good. So basically, according to Rav Yosef, if you have to bring a trap to trap it, it's not considered trap. That's like the main kind of gist. And sort of the exception to the rule would be kind of like chickens and geese, because even though, yeah, you bring a trap to trap them, but they're already kind of like trapped in their coop and stuff. All right, that sounds very nice. Friends, we get to a new Mishnah. Mitzudis chaya va'of. So traps of undomesticated animals and birds, vidugim, and fish, shason me'erev yomtiv, that you made them ready from erev yomtiv, lo yito mein b'yomtiv, you can't take what you trapped on yomtiv, ele imken yodeya shenitzodum erev yomtiv. You have to know that they were trapped on erev yomtiv. So if you lay out a trap before yomtiv for a chaya or an oaf or dugim, you have to check the trap before Yom Tov starts to make sure that you caught something. If you didn't check it, and now you find something on Yom Tov and you don't know, was it caught before Yom Tov or on Yom Tov, so that's not gonna work. It's not gonna work, L'maisa. It's not gonna work, L'maisa. That's not, you won't be able to chaperein. Okay. Now there's a story that a certain Gentile brought to Rabbi Gamliel. He brought fish to Rabbi Gamliel. Now we don't know, when were these fish trapped? Were they trapped before Yom Tov or on Yom Tov? Interestingly, Rabbi Gamliel says, and there he says, okay, I could eat these fish. I just don't want to receive them from this Gentile. Rashi says that he had certain beef with this fellow. I don't know why, but okay. One second, this doesn't make any sense. First, the Mishnah says that in order to chaperein from the trap, you have to what? You have to know for sure that you trapped the thing. No, that's not nice. It's a living creature. You have to know that you trapped the living creature before Yom Tov. If you're not sure, because you didn't check before Yom Tov, and now you don't know when it actually got trapped, so you're not allowed to eat it. But then we bring a story with Rabbi Gamliel, where a Gentile brought him fish. Now we don't know when it was trapped, and Rabbi Gamliel said, "Yeah, I could eat it. I don't want to, but I'm allowed to." So the Gemara says, "Ma'aseh this story? What's going on?" What? But first we say halacha that you're not allowed to eat a suffix, and then we bring a story with Rabbi Gamliel, where Hitaka said it's mutter to have a suffix, like right in the case when you're not sure when it was trapped. What's the dealio? How come the story that ostensibly we should be bringing to back up the halacha that we just said is actually coming punkt vakert, is coming to say the opposite of the halacha that we just said regarding suffix trapped on Yom Tiv or suffix trapped before Yom Tiv. So, and for the Gemara Chatzuri Mechso V'Achikatone, the Gemara says it's missing a few words. This is how you have to read the Mishnah. Sofik muchan oser. Rabbi Gamliel matir. So the Tanakama says that Sofik muchan, if we're not sure if the animal was trapped before Yom Tif, in which case it's muchan, you're allowed to use it, you're allowed to eat it. Or if it was trapped on Yom Tif, in which case it's muktzah, so it's oser. Rabbi Gamliel says no, it's taka mutter. And there was taka a story even that there was a Gentile. He came to Rabbi Gamliel, he had fish, and he said to Rabbi Gamliel, here's the fish, and he said, look, technically I could receive it from this fellow, I just don't want to, because he holds that if you're not sure, you're still allowed to. We're actually going to see what exactly he means by mutter. Can you eat it? Can you accept it? Whatever it is, we'll see that a little bit later. But he says that would be mutter. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel ein halacha k'Rabbi Gamliel. Says Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel that the halacha is not like Rabbi Gamliel. Okay. So those who teach Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel's statement on the following Beitzah, Sofik muchan Rabbi Gamliel matir Rabbi Yeshua oser, that if you're not sure if the animal is muchan, if you're allowed to eat it, because you're not sure if it was trapped before Yom Tif or on Yom Tif. So Rabbi Gamliel says it's okay, it's mutter. Rabbi Yeshua oser. Rabbi Yeshua says that it is oser. Interesting, gives you a little bit of insight into who the chachamim are. You know, sometimes the Gemara says man chachamim, this rabbi. Who's the chacham? Oh, it's this rabbi. So interesting, the different generations over here. You know, the generation of Rabbi Gamliel. So he was around with Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Eliezer. So who's the Tanakama by Rabbi Gamliel who was arguing with him? Who is the Chachamim? I think we might be able to say. So Rabbi Yeshua, who says Oser, he says it's Oser. Amar Rav Yeshua Amar Shmuel, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Halacha Rabbi Yeshua. It says Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel that the halacha is taka like Rabbi Yeshua, that the suffix, if you're not sure if it was trapped on Erev Yom Tif or on Yom Tif, it is Oser like Rabbi Yeshua. So those who teach Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel's statement on the following Beitzah. Here we go. Shochatin min han-nigarin be Yom Tiv. You're allowed to slaughter from the bivrim, essentially from these enclosures on Yomtiv, avalo min harishasos u'michmaros, but not from nets and not from traps. Now, Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer, says Reb Shimon ben Elazar, this is interesting, listen carefully. Ba'omitzon mekukalin me'erev Yomtiv, wah. So let's say you have a trap, let's say a net. I think we could relate, the mental model for a net could work. Let's say you have a net, and you tie, I don't know, one end. I'm not an expert when it comes to nets. I don't know anything about nets. Okay, now that we've gotten that out of the way, so you have a net. Now you tie one end of the net to like one tree, and then you tie the other end to another tree like far away, ki'ilu. A big net so that it covers a big swath of ground. And now basically what happens is, let's say an animal walks into the net on one end, so it'll try to fight and get its way out of the net, which will then kind of like detach it from the tree at the other end. Okay, now so mutzan mekukalin me'erev yomtiv. So if the fellow who put out the nets comes to check up on the nets on Erev Yom Tov, before Yom Tov starts, and he sees, okay, the net has been broken from the tree. So he might not necessarily see that the animal is there, but he sees that the net, that they've got to catch, essentially. So then, Biyadush Erev Yom Tov Nitzodus, and then obviously, the trapping happened on Erev Yom Tov. If he checks up on the net before Yom Tov, and it looks like they've got an animal, so the animal was trapped in Erev Yom Tov. You can eat it on Yom Tov. Fine. Umutar. Fine. It's mutar. But umutzon mekukalin b'Yom Tov. Now, what this means is that if you checked the trap before Yom Tov, right before Yom Tov, Mamish, as Yom Tov was starting, he went to see, hey, did I get anything? And he didn't. It was still untampered. The net was still intact. So okay, he didn't get a catch. And then and then he comes the next day and he sees that his trap has been disturbed. So well then clearly it was trapped on Yom Tov, right? Because he checked right before Yom Tov and it wasn't yet trapped. So Memele, he sees it's trapped now, it was trapped on Yom Tov. Ve'asurin, and it's asur. Now, if we were paying attention sharply, so we'll notice Hagufa Kasha. This is inherently a question. How come? Well, because on the one hand, Omart, you said, if you came and found that the net was tampered with on Erev Yom Tov, so you know for sure that on Erev Yom Tov it was trapped. Then you know that for sure on Erev Yom Tov it was trapped. So then the only reason that you're allowed to eat the animal on Yom Tov is because you know for sure that the animal was trapped on Erev Yom Tov. Hosveka asurin. But if you're not sure, right, meaning we're saying if you came and found that already on Erev Yom Tov it was trapped, so then you could eat the animal on Yom Tov. But if you're not sure, it's going to be asur. But then Ema Seifa, if we take a look at the second part of the Beitzah, what does it say? If you checked before Yom Tov and it wasn't yet trapped, the animal wasn't yet trapped, and now on Yom Tov you find that the animal is trapped, so you know for sure that on Yom Tov it was trapped, and that means that on Yom Tov it was trapped, so then you're not allowed to eat it. That's because you found it specifically on Yom Tov that it was trapped. But what if you're not sure? And then we can assume that it was trapped already from Erev Yom Tov and it's mutar. Basically, from the Reisha, we're saying that you have to know for sure that it was trapped in Erev Yom Tov, implying that if you're not sure, then it's asur. But then if we look at the Seifa, it says that, well, only specifically when you know that it was trapped on Yom Tov, that's when it's asur. But if you're not sure, it's mutar. So in the case when you're not sure when the animal was trapped, so is it asur like the Reisha would imply, or is it mutar like the Seifa would imply? Friends, what's your vote? Let us know in WhatsApp, okay? Alright, let's go weiter. Hochi ka'amar. So the Gemara says this is pshat. This is what Reb Shimon ben Elazar is saying. But mitzon mikukalim erev Yom Tiv. So if on erev Yom Tiv you come to check the trap and you find that it has been tampered with, well, piyadush me'erev Yom Tiv nitzodu mutarin. In that case, then you know for sure it was trapped on erev Yom Tiv and it's mutar. Hasfeka. But if you're not sure, naisek mishin nitzodu b'Yom Tiv, then we have to treat it as though it was trapped on Yom Tiv. Ve'asurin, and it's also meaning that when we're not sure, when it's a suffix, it's also, which is like Rabbi Yoshua says, not like Rabbi Gamliel, and Omer of Yehuda Amar Shmuel Lacha Reb Shimon ben Elazar, and says of Yehuda in the name of Shmuel that the Lacha is like Reb Shimon ben Elazar, not like Rabbi Gamliel who says that if you're not sure, it's nonetheless mutter. All right, gewaldig. That was geschmack, right? Yeah, that was good. The Omar Mutar Meim. Okay, so continues the Mishnah. The Mishnah had said that Rabbi Gamliel said that these right, that a Gentile brought over some fish, and we weren't sure when the fish were trapped. It's a suffix. Maybe it was trapped before Yom Tov, maybe it was trapped on Yom Tov. And what did Rabbi Gamliel say? Rabbi Gamliel said that they're mutar. Mutar in the Mai. Oh, so as I said earlier. So what exactly, they're permitted for what? Permitted to eat, permitted to look at, permitted to talk about, permitted for what? This is gewaldig, friends, you ready? Rav Omar mutarim lekabel, v'levi Omar mutarim b'achila. Okay. So Rav says, you're allowed to receive it. i.e. they're not muktzah, according to Rabbi Gamliel. You could receive it. You can't eat it. You could receive it. Levi says you can even eat it. That if you're not sure if they were trapped before Yom Tov or on Yom Tov, you can even eat it, according to Levi. Omar Rav, friends, you ready for this? Says Rab, le'olam al yimno adam atzmu bebeis hamedrash afilu shua achas. Friends, we should not hold ourselves back from the Beis Hamedrash, even for one moment. De honor v'levi avinon kame de Rebbe. Oh, this is so gewaldig on so many levels. Maybe just on two. I'm crying, friends. I'm crying. It's so beautiful. Why is it so beautiful? Because it's another place where we see that Rav was a student of Rebbe. I don't know. I like that stuff. We all like that stuff, right? Gewaldig, Rav. The Amora Rav was a student of Rebbe. The Tana Rebbe, who was the editor of the Mishnah. That's why you see sometimes Rav Tana Upalig, that Rav sometimes can be considered a Tana. He was like right at the turning point. So much so that Rav, who was the first Amora, or like the first generation of Amoraim, his Rebbe was already Rebbe who was the last Tana. Anyways, gewaldig. Anyways, so Rav and Levi, they were by the yeshiva, by Rebbe, and then he says, the honor of Levi avinun kame de Rebbe, that me and Levi we were learning by Rebbe. Ki Amr Lashmaita, when he was teaching the sugya about when you have a suffix of if it was trapped on Yom Tif or before Yom Tif, and right, and Rabbi Gamliel said that it's mutter. And Bo'orta Amr Mutarim Ba'achila, at night, Rebbe said what it means is that it's mutter ba'achila, you're allowed to eat it. B'tzafer Amr Mutarim Lekabel. But then the next morning, he changed his mind. He maybe had he slept on it, and he had a different maskana the next morning, and he said that no, you're allowed to receive it. It's not muktzah. That when the Gentile in the story came, and he came with his fish, and we weren't sure if it was trapped on Yom Tif or before Yom Tif, and Rabbi Gamliel says it's mutter. Wait, so Rebbe was explaining that when Rabbi Gamliel says that it's mutter, it means mutter to receive. So at night he had said, the previous night he had said that you're allowed to eat it. But then the following morning, he had said that you're allowed to receive it. It's not muktzah. Okay, according to Rabbi Gamliel, you're allowed to receive it. So, Ono da avoy be midrasha, and Rav continues, I was in the Beis HaMedrash the whole time, at night and the next morning. So how'd you be? So I knew to go back, to retract, to say, okay, apparently the halacha is not that you can eat it, but rather that you can receive it. Levi de lo hava be midrasha. But Levi wasn't at the Beis HaMedrash the next morning. Lo hadar be, he didn't know to retract, and that's why he maintained his opinion that you're even allowed to eat it. But the fact of the matter is, says Rav, that Rebbe retracted the next morning, and that's why it's so important to not miss, even a moment at the Beis HaMedrash. Who knows what you can who knows what's going to be happening during that moment. Gewaldig. Geschmack. Meisve, we have a kasha. Kasha and Levi. Nachush Evi Doron li Yisrael, a Gentile who brings a present, a gift for a Yid. Okay. Afilu dugim amefulamim, even moist fish, uferis b'nei yoman, and fruit of that day, and it's Yom Tif mutarin. So it says that it's mutar. Mistama, this is Rabbi Gamliel's opinion, who says that it's mutar. Now, b'shtama l'mandarim mutarin l'kabel shapir. So I understand, according to Mandarim, who says what it means is that you're allowed to receive it, but not necessarily eat it. Okay, the Gemara is going to ask, why does it make any sense? But meaning the point is, okay, you're allowed to receive these fruits that were like picked that day or whatever, and fish that was trapped that day. But if you say that it means that you're allowed to eat it, would you be allowed to eat fruits that were picked that day? To which the Gemara says, that doesn't make sense, but what? These fruits that were picked that day, are you allowed to move them? No, the whole thing would be muksa. So, if we're talking about, fruits that were picked that day and fish that were trapped that day, I mean, it's clear that you wouldn't, this isn't a good proof, because it's clear that you wouldn't be allowed to move them, you wouldn't be allowed to eat them. Ela bekavre da'adime, rather it's talking about fish that they're like, like their gills or something, or like still red or whatever. Uferi dechvisha beyarka, or fruits that they had picked the day before and put into, fruits that they had put into vegetables, askinon, that I guess it's not necessarily clear if it was picked that day or the day before. Why do we call them that day? Oh no, so these vegetables, so these fruits these fruits they taka harvested the day before, and they put them immediately in vegetables, I guess to preserve their freshness or something like that. But even though it seems they're so fresh that it was as if they're picked that day. So my karlu b'nei yoman shehein ke'ein b'nei yoman, that it's as though they were picked that day because they preserve their freshness, and even though they're so fresh, you're still allowed to, I guess that they wouldn't necessarily be considered muktzah. Okay, but I guess that this isn't necessarily a proof for the suffix, suffix on Yom Tov, suffix before Yom Tov. Alright? Omer Rav Papa says, Rav Papa, Hilchasa, that the halacha is, Nachu shevidoron liyisrael b'Yom Tov. If a Gentile brings a gift to a Yid on Yom Tov, yeshmi also amin b'mechubar. So if there is of that species that's still like attached to the ground, i.e. that it was plausible that he harvested this whatever he's bringing that day on Yom Tov, well then also it's not going to be allowed, because we have to be concerned that maybe he harvested it on Yom Tov. For the erev nami asurn v'chadei also. And you also can't eat it until Motzai Yom Tov, enough time that it would take to pick these whatever he's bringing for you. Right? We learned about this halacha in Masechta Shabbos, I believe in the context of like the bathhouses, that if the water is heated up, so we have to wait enough time on Motzai Shabbos that they could have heated up the water on Motzai Shabbos. So here also, if this Gentile brought for you something that was harvested, that could have potentially been harvested that day, so we have to wait at least enough time on Motzai Yom Tov until however long it would take to potentially harvest them. So you're not necessarily getting benefit from malacha that was done for you on Yom Tov, but rather, any benefit that would have happened on Yom Tov, you're waiting it out until Motzai Yom Tov anyways for that amount of time, that, the fact that it was done on Yom Tov now becomes relevant, because it could have also been done after Yom Tov, and it would have the same result. V'me'ein me also hamin b'mechuber, and if there are no longer this species like to harvest anymore, because they've already all been harvested, well then you know that it wasn't harvested that day, so then you'd be the only other implementation detail then becomes tocha tchum mutter chutz tchum aser. If it's coming from within the tchum Shabbos, so then it would be permitted, but if it's outside of the tchum, then it would not be allowed. Now interestingly, the Gemara seems to be saying that now if it came from outside of the tchum for Ruvain, so Ruvain, we said Ruvain can't have it because it came from outside of the tchum, but Shimon can have it. Rashi says, why should Shimon be able to have it? So he suggests that, well, maybe if we're going to say that tchum Shabbos is only the Rabbanon, so then if we're going to say that tchum Shabbos is only the Rabbanon, well then maybe we could be lenient to say that, well, if it comes from outside of tchum Shabbos, it might not be allowed for Ruvain, but at least Shimon can use it. Alright, friends, that was Daf Chof Daled of Masechta Beitzah. That was a very interesting daf, I think, right? The first daf of the perek of, we started the perek of tzudin, dugim, and abivrin, that basically we said that when it comes to, fish, you really have to trap them the day before, don't trap them on Yom Tov. When it comes to undomesticated animals and birds, so they really have to be already considered trapped. If they're already considered trapped, and we add a machlokes between Rav Ashi and Rav Yosef about what that means. Rav Ashi says, well, if you can get to it in one lunge, it's considered trapped. If it would need more than one lunge, it's not considered trapped. And Rav Yosef says, if you have to say, come and get me a trap so that I could trap it, well, then it's not yet going to be considered trapped, although the exceptions to that seems to be a chicken and a goose. So basically, if it's already considered trapped, then you can chop around on Yom Tov. If it's not yet considered trapped, if you still need to trap it, so then it's going to be considered. If it's already considered traps, you can chop around. If it's not yet considered traps, then you can't chop around. We saw machlokes between the Rabbanon and Rabbi Yehuda regarding trapping animals on Shabbos and how it applied to Yom Tov. That according to Rabbi Yehuda, bivrin would not yet be considered trapped. Whereas according to the Chachamim, bivrin would already be considered trapped. Then we got to a new Mishnah, which is very interesting. Essentially, machlokas between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Gamliel. We also saw Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel get involved. That basically, well, certainly if you trap an animal before Yom Tov, you can eat it on Yom Tov. But if you're not sure if it was trapped, right, and if for sure it was trapped on Yom Tov when it wasn't allowed to, then you can't eat it. But if you're not sure if it was trapped on Yom Tov or before Yom Tov, so Tanna Kama says it's not allowed, and we said that Tanna Kama is Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Gamliel says it is allowed. Okay, and then we got to a question of what does it mean that it is allowed. So we had this interesting machlokas between Rav and Levi. That Rav says it means that it's allowed, i.e., it's not muktzah. You're allowed to accept it. Levi says not only that, you can even eat it. And Rav said that the truth is that Levi was assuming that Rebbe explained Rabbi Gamliel as being that you can eat it, but the fact of the matter is that Rebbe actually retracted, and that's why it's super important not to miss anything from the base Hamedrash. Rav Papa then expounded when it comes to receiving things from Gentiles on Yom Tov. So the general rule is if there are still that, let's say it's maybe cherries or something. If there's still cherries that you can harvest, well then you have to assume that maybe it was harvested that day and it's not allowed. And you have to wait on Motzoi Yom Tov for enough times that you could have harvested, that you could harvest it yourself. If there are no more cherries to harvest, so then okay, as long as they come from within the tchum, it's allowed. If they come from outside the tchum, it's not allowed. But you can but your friend can eat it. That would be okay, because we assume that tchum and derabanan, and then you could, so your friend would be allowed to eat it. Friends, that was Daf Chof Daled of Masechta Beitzah. I hope you enjoyed it. Cheers.